Welcome to the Politicrat. I am Omar. It is Friday, September the 11th, 2020.
To mention, we have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City. It happened just a few moments ago, apparently. We have very little information available at this point in time. But
that was a clip from the Today Show 19 years ago today. New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Northern Virginia. The World Trade Center, a field in Shanksville, and the Pentagon. The sites of the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. On this episode of The Politicrat, looking back exactly 19 years ago today, and looking at the present day with a pandemic, with climate change, and the imperative of voting. All of that coming up next. Welcome back. Unless you are over the age of roughly 25 or so, you really will not remember what happened 19 years ago. I mean, I guess you'd have to be around the age of 30 or so right now to have any kind of real memories about what happened 19 years ago today. September 11th, 2001 was a date in history that shocked the American conscience. It really did. The United States of America had not witnessed anything like what we witnessed 19 years ago on American shores. Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. But the attack was not captured on camera as far as I know. This attack from 19 years ago today was captured in full view of cameras. At 8:46, I believe it was, a.m. Eastern Time, you had a plane strike the World Trade Center. And then about 18 or 19 minutes later, at I believe 9:03 a.m., a second plane struck the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan in New York. And New York City was stunned. I was stunned. I looked out of my window because I was living in New York at the time, and I looked out of the window and I saw the smoke wafting all the way back here to where I was living in New York City. It was an absolutely unforgettable and horrific sight. I still have the photographs that I took with one of my cameras, and I still remember the way that smoke smelled. I still remember all the paper that was blowing in the air. I mean, this is over the East River and blowing all the way across different boroughs. Paper that was in the building, that was in the tower, that was on those floors. And it was a sight and a memory that no one who was alive and really conscious and aware, say somebody 10 years older, 10 years old and above, will ever forget. No one's going to forget what that was like especially if you're in New York as I was. And people watching it on television wherever they were around the world won't forget. the replayed images of those planes smashing into that tower looped over and over and over again, only added to the trauma. And I remember I was supposed to be, at that time, I was between jobs at that time, and I was supposed to have a job interview that day at Salomon Brothers. People remember Salomon Brothers. If you're old enough, it's an old financial firm. They're no longer around as far as I know. But I was supposed to have an interview there at one of the World Trade Center towers, the World Financial Center. I think it was Building 7, actually. And it was supposed to be for, I think, 1:30 in the afternoon on September the 11th. And that was a Tuesday. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And of course, once this happened, that interview obviously was not going to happen. And it was Building 7 that later on that day completely collapsed. And it had been pulled. I mean, I know that people will dispute that and the conspiracy theorists abound, but that building was pulled. And there's audio of the order being given for that to happen. Now, that can be disputed, but there's no other explanation for why. Larry Rothstein, or Larry Silverstein, was the property owner. He owned Silverstein Properties, and he owned that building as far as I know. And that building came down in demolition style, as if when there are buildings that get pulled down or stadia that get exploded or pulled down, there is a way to pull it down. And that is exactly what happened. And that building went down in that same way. And that happened hours and hours and hours after. And it was the only building that fell down in that manner. All the other buildings, the two towers, were hit and then they fell. Now, there are conspiracy theorists who say that those buildings were pulled down as well, or that they were rigged with explosives. There are certainly things about 9/11, 2001, that need to have answers that we'll probably never get definitive answers for, or if we do, it won't be for years to come. And it will be way, way down into the future after many of us are no longer here. I mean, I still have the New York Times from Wednesday, September the 12th, 2001. I still have that copy of the New York Times. It's brown, not unlike the skies of San Francisco were just a couple of days ago, orange. But I still have that newspaper, and I still have the accounts from people on the ground, and I know that eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable in many respects. But at least 2 or 3 different people, and I'm not going to go through reading the article, but at least 2 or 3 different people talked about seeing cars in the vicinity of the towers exploding spontaneously as if they were all set to a rigger that was attached to these cars, and they would all blow up one after the next, and the next one would blow up the next one, and the next one would blow up the next one, and the next one would blow up the next car, and it would be like a domino effect where every previous car would every car would explode, and then the one after that would explode, and so on and so forth. That is what several eyewitnesses had been quoted in the New York Times as saying. I remember going down to the site about a week or 2 after the event happened, and I just shook my head. I just stood there and I just looked at it in disbelief. It was down there by William Street, I think. Cortlandt Street, near there, not far. Not far away, and And you just looked at it. It was near the Trinity Church, not far from the Trinity Church. And I still have the photos. I have to get the photo album. It was just unforgettable. You just saw the rubble and the wreckage. And some people were sick enough to take photos of it. And I can't do that. That was the effect. And did I not mention, and how dare I not, until now, that 2,973 people passed away, were killed in those terror attacks that affected the World Trade Center in New York City, that affected the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and affected the Pentagon in Northern Virginia. 2,973 people were killed. I don't think that people are going to ever forget what happened on that day. I don't think that people are ever, who were around, of course, at that time and who were fully conscious and aware, are ever going to forget the images, the memories, the panic, the fear, the pain, and the loss. No one is ever going to forget that here in the United States. I remember the news coverage. I remember watching CNN robotically for hours. I remember watching the coverage on NBC. I remember watching the local news coverage. I still have videotapes. That's right, VHS tapes. And I had recorded a lot of that coverage. It just so happened that I had been recording, and I just recorded the whole day pretty much on these tapes. You know, you have the EP function. For those of you who are old enough to remember, you would have EP on the VHS, the video recorder, VCR. And you'd set it to EP, which is the extended play, and it would extend the amount of time you could put, recording time you could put on your VHS tape. It would extend, but the quality would not be as good. And that's what EP was, extended play. And so you'd put that on and you'd put the VHS tape in your VCR. And that's what I did. I just recorded the whole thing. And I've watched pieces of it every now and again, not for years since, but every now and again, say back in the past, say, 10 years ago or so, I would watch pieces of it. And of course now, you don't need to have the VHS tape and the VCR to watch what the coverage was like, because of course it's on YouTube now. We have this thing called YouTube, which of course was invented in the intervening years, and YouTube is now able to put all these images out there for us. So YouTube records all of this, and you can go look any number of television broadcasts up from that day, and some of them, like some of the audio that you heard earlier and some of the other audio you're going to be hearing, hours and hours of that are available on YouTube. I used to work with people in the industry of finance who passed away on that day, who were killed on that day 19 years ago. And it's just difficult to know that they're no longer here. I'm not even going to talk about the politics of everything that was made of George W. Bush and what he did on that day, of what happened the month before that, when that presidential daily brief came in, and not this year. I mean, maybe I should be doing that, but I'm not going to, because this is the day to always, not just this day, but every day as well, to think about those families of those individuals who were killed. I think that's one of the most important things here. It is the most important thing. Nearly 3,000 people whose lives will never return to their loved ones, and they'll never return. And unfortunately, many of those people felt that the only way out of there was to leave the building, and leave it in a way that you would imagine from a disaster movie. I think that is as vivid and as powerful an image in your mind that you can think of without me having to go any further than that. We here in this country, called the United States of America, have gone through various levels of grief. Not just over the last 19 years, but really over the last 401 plus years. Before it was even known as the United States of America. At the time that it was Native American land, that it was the country of Native American people. So this is another stage of grief, another stage of loss. I know people now who witnessed those scenes up close and personal, firsthand. Now, I watched them on my television and I saw what happened, and I saw the images, and I'm sure that you've seen the images, whether you were alive then or not. But one thing I know is that this country banded together in the days and weeks after. And the thing that I want to take away from 19 years ago, as well as the memory of those who passed, who were killed, is that this country banded together. There were a few days and weeks in time where a vast majority of the American public really did put its arms around each other. I remember walking the streets of New York City. I remember walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. I remember walking and speaking spontaneously as New Yorkers do, and still do, with, social distancing now, of course. But I remember walking those streets and just talking to people, and people talking to me. Walking with people I know, and walking with people and talking to people I don't know or didn't know. There was a moment that New York City and much of the country really did band together. And that's the other thing I will take away from 19 years ago. And of course, with the sad, painful, and horrific memories and those events of exactly 19 years ago today, and the moments and weeks after that, knowing that we were a unified country in terms of spirit and a nation in grief, you can only, and you can't help but fast forward to the present and see where we are right now as a nation amidst a pandemic that has now killed over 193,000 people in this country. You fast forward to this moment and you realize, and you obviously see here in the United States, just how divided we are. Welcome back. On this date, exactly 19 years ago, there was actually a primary being held in New York City for mayor and other offices. It was very interesting because Rudolph Giuliani had completed his 8 years in office as New York City mayor. And there were really people in the primary, in the Democratic primary, because Rudolph Giuliani is a Republican. And we know, of course, about where he's really gone to and who he is. I'm not even going to bother rehashing that. I think people who listen to this podcast are fully aware of who Rudolph Giuliani is. By the way, he infamously put the command tower, put the command tower in the World Trade Center bunker. Yep, that's the guy that did that. And we know what happened to that on September 11th. You know, this is the thing, one other thing. Rudolph Giuliani got all this praise and he was being exalted as America's mayor. Anybody who, again, is around the age of 30 or so, or a little older than 30, will remember that very specifically and clearly. That Rudolph Giuliani was being hailed as America's mayor. And he was being puffed up by the media. And, oh, he was this guy in crisis. He did so well. And again, I'm not going to get into all the weeds of it, but look at where, quote unquote, America's mayor is today. Helping the Russians undermine American elections. That is your America's mayor, everybody. But when these primaries, the New York City primary, Democratic primary, was being held 19 years ago today, obviously this terror attack happened. And Osama bin Laden was the person behind the attacks. At least that's what we know. And I know there are people out there who are conspiracy theorists who would say otherwise and who have said otherwise. There's actually a documentary. I'm sure you can still find it on YouTube if you want to entertain and look at those things. And I don't think that there's any reason to do so. But I do think it's useful to get a perspective of what other people are saying about this, because there are things that do not add up. The documentary is called Loose Change. And as I say, you can make your own judgments about whether or not you agree with or believe what the documentary filmmakers are saying in that documentary called Loose Change. Now, again, I mention it because I do think that it is of some kind of import for a perspective, because I don't think what they're saying, I certainly don't think everything that they are saying in that documentary is completely off the wall. I really don't. There are some things that are said that make sense. But I'll leave it there. It's called Loose Change. And I think there's more than one part to it. Maybe there's part 1, 2, 3, and 4. But what I would say is I would just watch part 1, and then you can make up your mind and see if anything that is being said in that documentary at least makes sense or is at least somewhat plausible. But anyway, there's that. Because as I said, there are things about what happened 19 years ago that have never been really explained, things that are inconsistent, things that don't make sense, things that we can literally see with our own eyes. We can see puffs of smoke blowing out as each floor on the World Trade Center tower comes down. We see this. And it's right there in front of us. We hear reports from N.J. Burkett and others. I believe Pat Dawson. I still have this on my laptop. Video of Pat Dawson from NBC talking about FDNY, Fire Department of New York person coming up to him and telling him that this could have been an explosion. He has reason to believe that it's an explosion that happened in the World Trade Center. I'll see if I can find that for you before I end this episode. But so there are things about 9/11, 2001 that we don't have answers for. And that's where a conspiracy theorist does fill in the blanks. And I'm not even demonizing conspiracy theorists. I'm at least not with this event. Because it's one thing to make a documentary that in some instances actually does raise some critical questions. And it's quite another thing to be Alex Jones, who downright says things like, well, Sandy Hook didn't happen, and that it was just actors. This documentary, Loose Change, is not like that. So, just a full disclosure, that's not the kind of thing that this documentary is talking about when it comes to what happened 19 years ago. But it was such a horrific day. And this may be distressing for some listeners. There's nothing graphic on this audio that I'm going to be playing you for the next 4 or 5 minutes or so. But it does recount the panic and the fear as expressed in the voice of a woman who had called into NBC literally moments after seeing a big ball of fire coming from one of the towers of the World Trade Center. So I do want to just provide you with that warning for these next 5 minutes or so, that some of what you will hear is a panicked voice, and that may be very distressing to you or to some people. Here is how things unfolded at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001. No one will ever forget 9/11 here in the United States. Nobody will. And right now, no one is ever going to forget this pandemic that has taken the lives of almost 200,000 human beings here inside the United States. And it's somewhat crude to hear people say, well, we have a 9/11 coming every day and a half or two. But sadly, it's true. It's awful to think about it that way, but that's the truth. But I think what sounds somewhat offensive, and I don't know about you, but what registers as offensive to me is when someone says, well, we're having another 9/11. Those are people's lives. 2,973 people died. And when I hear people say, well, we're having a 9/11 every day or two, it's as if they're just throwing 2,973 lives into a casual conversation about other lives being lost at such a large scale. And it feels dismissive to me. I don't know about you, but for me, to just throw that on the scrap heap like that, as if you're just tossing aside 2,973 lives, it just sounds awfully dismissive. If that is what you are using as a barometer to convey just how horrific and deadly this pandemic has been here in the US and all around the world, then you have already lost a sense of what the proportionality is. People are already numbed to this level of death, and that's deeply disturbing as well. Although, unfortunately, not that surprising in the least. It's important to look at human life and look at all life, and particularly the lives of people who have passed away, who have been killed, and look at them as people. And let's not have this language about a 9/11 every 2 days, because that registers no meaning. At some point, that registers no meaning whatsoever. Some people have actually not remembered or not chosen to remember this day 19 years ago. Some people have filed it away. But those families will never forget, and nor will I, and nor will many of you. How could you forget what happened 19 years ago? How can you ever forget what's happening right now? We've got climate change as well this week in dramatic effect here in California and in several other states, including Oregon, where the sky was red or orange or brown or all three. I will never forget, that was just 2 days ago now, where I'm here and it's completely orange. At 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 10 a.m., and all the way into the day until we got to around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was orange sky, completely. Fire orange and deeper orange than that. It was like a nuclear winter. That is what climate change does along with these wildfires. That is what climate change does. And we, unfortunately, are going to see more of this here in California and in Oregon and in a number of the other western states here in the United States. And we're going to start to see this in many other parts of the country. And the sad thing is that the corporate news media barely talks about it. And if they do, it's for the sake of spectacle. We need to have a dialogue, and I've talked about this earlier this week. We need to have a real dialogue and a real education about what climate change is, what it's doing, and what we can do to try to arrest some of these effects. We can't stop it now because the genie has been way out of the bottle. But we can at least do those small things in our lives on a daily basis, whether it's recycling, whether it is conserving energy and electricity and those kinds of things, where we can at least try to slow this down somewhat and at least not further contribute to what's already happening. In many ways, it is too late. But what we can at least do now is not further contribute to what we've seen here in California and in Oregon and in other states and in places all over the world. What we saw in Australia earlier this year, the beginning of the year, and late last year, where it seemed like the entire country of Australia was on fire. The skies were constantly orange. There were so many things being burned. This is very, very serious. And if people aren't connecting these things together, what happened in Australia for at least a couple of months and you have the prime minister of that country taking a vacation in Hawaii or wherever he was, and he was putting that out on Instagram and social media, and he was there smiling with his kids and his family, while Australia, the country that he's the prime minister of, was burning. If you can't connect the dots, then you're just unconnected from the world. And quite frankly, Joe Biden needs to be talking about climate change. He really does. And I know that he supported things that have been the enemy of climate. I mean, he has in his career on the legislative side, but he's also done some things I would hope change that. But he's a guy that supports fracking. He doesn't support new fracking. He just says he will not end fracking, meaning the fracking that's presently happening, which is really stark and honest of him to say, but is also really disreputable too, especially given what we're seeing. Of course, there are things about Joe Biden that I don't like. But even with this, there are so many other things in addition to the climate, which is really the most important thing. Yet there are so many other things on top of and including climate that must be considered here. And voting is very important. Voting is very important. We now are 53. We have 53 voting days left. 53 of them. There are some states like North Carolina whose individuals are already filling out their ballots and sending them back in. And I hope they do that right away. I hope they are doing more of that. More people continue to do that. Whether you put it into a drop box, whether you walk it to your county board of elections office or to the Secretary of State or to your voting precinct, if you can. I'm going to do a bit of a refresher course, I guess. And beginning tomorrow, I guess, or sometime very soon in the next few episodes, I will start to get very specific about states and applying for these absentee ballots. And as I've said before, you should be applying for your absentee ballot right now. And when you apply for that ballot, make sure that you send it in right away. I would drop off the application at your local board of elections, your county board of elections, or I would simply go into the county board of elections or call them. I'd give them a phone call because I know some of them aren't operating due to this pandemic and they're working remotely. But what I would do is call them as well and ask them, can I pick up my ballot? Or if you're going to send it out, instead of sending it out, can I just come down and pick it up? And see what they say about that. Be proactive is what I'm saying. Vote early, preferably in person, because the earlier you vote in early voting, the better. I would vote early in person. That, to me, is the best way. Because although this pandemic is really raging on, and it certainly is, if you vote early, the earlier you vote in early voting, the better. There will be less lines. There will be no lines in many instances. And you will find that you will be in and out of there. If you have a game plan and you've already looked at the ballot online, because a lot of these states put the ballot as it will look online of all the candidates and everybody and the issues and propositions and initiatives, you can do your homework at home by filling out all of that information on a piece of paper and bringing that piece of paper with you to the ballot box when you go and vote in person. And then just fill out all the information from your piece of paper onto the actual ballot that you're going to vote on. And you will find that you will save so much time for those of you who are really skittish about early voting in person. But if you are someone who is much more comfortable doing the absentee balloting and you just want to mail in ballot in, that absentee ballot, they're both the same thing. You want to mail those in, then fine, you mail it in. Or you drop it off at a drop box. Or you actually drive or walk to your local county board of elections or jump on a bus, hop in a taxi, and if you feel comfortable going in person and dropping it off at the office if the office is open, you have to call them. I would ask you to call them. I have a full voters guide and voters list for every state. All the Secretary of State's offices, I have provided a link to that in the liner notes. Every day's episode of the last few days, you will find that link in the liner notes to this episode and to all of the last few episodes. The voting guide, every single Secretary of State's website. These are all official places. So this is information coming directly from the people who run the elections in each of these states. You can't get much more official and factual than that. I've got links to early voting, links to absentee ballot applications, links to voter registration applications, links to the poll worker application if you want to be a poll worker in any of these states. And I'm still updating that on a daily basis. So please do take a look at that list. It's a very comprehensive list, lots of links. It's a dizzying array of links and very, very few pictures, although I'm working on adding some pictures so to break up that level of constant links. There's loads of links and they're clear links. I think they're easy to understand. It's just that there's lots of them and you have to look for in every state and you will see it. But I think it's one of the most comprehensive, and I'm tooting my own horn here, but I think it's one of the most comprehensive links, comprehensive voting guides that you will see. And it's certainly the most accurate one out there. I know I'm bragging, but I think it's the truth. Why? Because it's from the horse's mouth. It's from the actual people who are running the elections, who are giving you their voting rules, who are telling you if you need ID or not, who are telling you what the deadlines are. I also have links to checking your voter registration, making sure that your voter registration is still updated and current and that you are registered, because that's the most important thing right now, is to make sure that you are registered to vote. Make sure that you are registered. And I have links to that for every state where you can check your registration. Boom. It takes 2 seconds. You put your name, address in most cases, your date of birth. In some cases, maybe they want your driver's license or maybe they want your social security number or something, the last 4 digits of it or whatever. You just put that information in and voila, you will find out in 2 seconds whether or not you are registered to vote. And don't forget to keep checking your voter registration. Please, that's very important. I'd say once a week, even twice a week at this point. So that's on my guide. And that guide, if you don't want to look at the links in the liner notes, go on social media, go on Twitter. You can find me at the Popcorn, REEL. And you will find a pinned tweet, PINNED, pinned tweet. And that pinned tweet is the comprehensive voting guide for all 50 states that I put together. So take a look at it there and please pass it around to people, because this information is all accurate. This information is coming directly from the secretaries of state and the boards of election who run these elections. So this is accurate information, and I update it because I look at these sites and check if there's anything that needs to be updated. And I'm doing this on a daily basis. I spend a few minutes out of the day doing this every single day. So please consult that list. I know there's lots of other organizations that have put out some lists. Some of them are very helpful. Some of them I would be cautious of because, again, I tell this story often. there is one of these organizations that put out a list a few weeks back, or at least I saw it a few weeks back, and it listed states that had early voting. And then they had all the states, every state, all 50 states, they listed, and then they listed whether or not they have early voting in the state or not. And one of the states listed was Rhode Island. And they said that Rhode Island did not have early voting. And at the time, this is when I was putting together all of the official places where you get this information from each of these secretaries of state who run the elections. They would know, right? So I got to Rhode Island. I said, well, look, this particular other organization over here is saying that Rhode Island does not have early voting. And of course, I got and looked at the Secretary of State website for Rhode Island. And what did I see on the homepage? Rhode Island has early voting. I tell this story all the time. And from that day onwards, I stopped looking at this other organization's website. And that just further validated my mission to complete this list and do this with the official websites, not these third-party websites. The site that I've given you, that you will see, the document that you will see online from me on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL in the pinned tweet, contains the links of all of the secretaries of state with their official factual information. It's all coming from them. They're the ones that run the elections. So be very careful. If you're going to go to some third-party site, be very careful. I would advise you to go to the sites on my list because they're all from the secretaries of state. They're all official. So please be careful with that. Please. When I come back, make sure you vote early. All right? Please. Do not wait. Vote early. Be proactive right now. If you vote early, you will have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. I guarantee if you vote early in droves and you get your family and friends to vote early and people to vote early, I will almost guarantee it for you, because this election is going to be won on turnout, and more than that, on early voter turnout. Welcome back. A Wisconsin story, for those of you who may not have been aware of this, from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, dated September the 10th. That would be yesterday. Patrick Marley, no relation to Bob, as far as I can tell, writes this story headlined, Wisconsin Supreme Court says mailing of absentee ballots should be halted while Green Party lawsuit is considered. Now, this is really annoying to me but it's not surprising. Wisconsin Supreme Court is held by a Republican majority of 4-3. 4 judges are Republican, 3 are Democratic. And the only reason why it's 4-3 is because Jill Karofsky earlier this year won an election against the arch conservative on that court, Daniel Kelly. And thank goodness that she did. And without going into the whole article, and I would really like to speak to Patrick Marley. I've actually reached out to Mr. Marley, and I hope that he will accept my invitation. It would be really great to have him on, to talk about this article. And I just want to just tell you that the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is a really political court, and knowing that Wisconsin is such an important state, they have ruled that the Wisconsin Election Commission, which is one of the places I link to in my guide to vote for voters. The Wisconsin Commission, according to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, has to stop sending out ballots to voters while this issue around a lawsuit by the Green Party is resolved. And I just think this is absolutely hideous for the Wisconsin Supreme Court to pull this kind of stunt, because it smacks of politics beyond the extreme and in the extreme. Nearly 400,000 ballots have already been sent out to voters. And the whole point of this article is, well, the thrust of the news of the article by Patrick Marley is that the state Supreme Court, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, is saying, well, you have to stop sending out these absentee ballots now, Wisconsin Elections Commission. Stop sending out the ballots so that we can figure out whether or not these ballots should include the Green Party candidate on the ticket. This is really about voter suppression, in my opinion. This is really, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, about voter suppression and about having a spoiler on the ballot. This is really odious that you would, at this very late stage, we are now 7.5 weeks. This is really odious. We are now 7.5 weeks away from finding out how this election is going to start to pan out. We have 53 voting days left in this election. And that's really, again, the way that this should be talked about. 53 voting days left until we start to find out on November 3rd how things are going to start shaking out. And you've got the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I should say. You've got the Wisconsin Supreme Court telling people, election officials in Wisconsin, that, oh, you should stop sending out ballots to people so that we can figure out if the Green Party person should be on the list, should be on the ballots. This is disgusting. The Green Party doesn't have a hope in hell. And why wasn't this situation resolved months ago? When did the Green Party candidate bring his lawsuit? Given what you know about this particular Green Party and its iteration, the Jill Stein Green Party, and you know how that worked out. Some of you voted for Jill Stein. I know people who did in 2016. I begged them, and I told you this before, and I don't beg really at all, very often at all, but I begged the people I knew, and I still know, not to vote for Jill Stein. But, they didn't listen. They didn't listen. To no avail. And now you've got another Green Party person, hey presto, just in time, right, for the election, who now wants to get on the ballot at this late blimmin' stage. All of these tricks, and the Republicans love this, and that's why the Republican-dominated Supreme Court in Wisconsin, 4-3, is actually telling Wisconsin to stop sending ballots. Doesn't this ring a bell from 2000? The Republican-controlled U.S. Supreme Court telling Florida to stop counting votes in a classic trampling of states' rights. Bush v. Gore. Don't you remember that from December 13th, 2000? You can go look up that decision. It was hailed by the U.S. Supreme Court as a once-in-a-lifetime decision. And you should go and read Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg's dissent. It is scathing. And as it should be. And we're seeing this again now in Wisconsin. So now this order 4-3 by the Wisconsin Supreme Court is leaving open this possibility, according to Patrick Marley, of reprinting 2.3 million ballots and delaying the printing of other ballots. Moves that election officials said would cause them to miss deadlines set by state law. This is really evil, quite frankly. But you know what? As I said yesterday in yesterday's edition, elections have consequences. I said that either yesterday or the day before. Elections have consequences. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court consists of judges who are elected to their position on that court. So if there are judges who are on the ballot this November, to those of you in Wisconsin who are voting, who are listening, may I suggest to you that you do your level-headed best and make sure you tell everyone you know to vote in a Democratic judge so that you won't have this obstruction in the process of voting, so that you won't have to be confused, and so that you won't have to have a ballot that you need to come to you for whatever reason now is delayed because they're thinking of reprinting 2.3 million ballots and delaying the printing of others at that Supreme Court. So now we're going to hold the process hostage and delay and cause more chaos and more confusion. This is the law and order party, right? These Republicans. And now you've got a Republican-led and Republican-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court playing politics and voter suppressing. Can we just be honest about that? Can we just have it absolutely right? That is what they are doing. I'm going to put a link to Patrick's story, and I would like to speak to him, and I'm hoping that that comes to fruition at some point in the near future. But you really have to read his story there in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Again, it's dated from September 10th, 2020. It's titled, Wisconsin Supreme Court Says Mailing of Absentee Ballots Should Be Halted While Green Party Lawsuit is Considered. I just think this is an absolute farce. Absolute farce. Jill Stein got 31,000 plus votes in Wisconsin in 2016. And Donald Trump won the state by around 23,000 votes. So she got more votes than he won the state by. There is a lot of chicanery going on. And then you see these photos of Jill Stein in October of 2015 sitting around a table in Moscow with Vladimir Putin and Michael Flynn. I'm not kidding. That photo is readily available. It's readily available on YouTube, on the internet. There's a photo of Jill Stein sitting at a table with Vladimir Putin and Michael Flynn. And Michael Flynn, of course, is the disgraced former national security advisor who lasted barely 3 weeks in his job and, of course, was indicted and pled guilty twice to lying to Congress, or fraud and lying to Congress. 2 counts of it. And this Justice Department now wants to get rid of that case and vacate that stuff. This is such a politicized party, the Republicans. Everything they do is all about politics. It's not about you. It's all about politics. Right down to this U.S. Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore in 2000, and right down to the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 2020. We're going to stop the voting process. We're going to stop you from getting your absentee ballot because we've got to consider this Green Party lawsuit. Jill Stein of the Green Party sitting around a table with Vladimir Putin, Michael Flynn. And now you've got this Green Party candidate who wants to be on the ballot. And now, just 7.5 weeks before the election, the Wisconsin Supreme Court wants to consider this lawsuit from the Green Party if this guy should be on the ballot in Wisconsin. And you're going to arrest and hijack and stop a process of voting. You're going to stop absentee ballots from going out to people. You're ordering that to happen. Now, I'm not saying that the 360,000 that have already gone out can't be returned. Of course they can. But for the other 2.3 million ballots, you want to reprint those and delay the printing of other ballots? You want to interrupt the process and then make it more chaotic so that Donald Trump can, on November 3rd, turn around and go, look, it's rigged. The Republicans are doing that. They're rigging it. This is an example of it. Not to mention the automatic polling closings and the poll station closings that you're going to find on November 3rd, which is why I say you must vote early. I told you this before. You know this. You don't even have to listen to me say it to you. Just look at what happened in these primaries at the beginning of the year, earlier in the year, summer of the year. You saw long lines in Atlanta. You saw those people in Louisville in Kentucky banging on the convention center doors to let us in, let us in, let us in. Because the doors were closed early. It was the only place in Louisville that was a voting precinct. There was nowhere else to vote in Louisville but there. And they closed the doors early. And they banged and banged on the mostly black people to get in and finally be allowed to vote. This happened back in June or July. I mean, this is not ancient history. The long lines that you saw in Houston and other parts of Texas, predominantly black areas, during Super Tuesday, a man was online for 9 hours. 10 hours. He didn't vote until 1:30 the next morning. In South Carolina, all the poll stations that closed, all the poll booths that closed without telling the voters. So voters would go to their precinct and then, whoop, oh, it's closed. They never warned these voters in advance, predominantly black and some poor whites. They never warned them. They closed hundreds of precincts in South Carolina during the Democratic primary. And Joe Biden became the winner. But my point is that the Republicans who control these states, because that's who controls the legislatures in these states that I've just mentioned. This is what they're doing. And none of the voters were notified in advance. So they'd go to these places in a lot of these predominantly black and poor white neighborhoods. Oh, your polling place has been closed. And then they'd have to be redirected somewhere else. I mean, that is evil, but that's what these Republicans are doing. They're doing it in places all over the country. There's issues with voting in Wisconsin, I've told you about, speaking of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, where people were waiting and some of them dying to vote. Remember, I keep telling you about that infamous, iconic picture of a woman with "This is ridiculous," that big sign, and she had a face mask on? Issues of voting in numerous places. So if you still, really, I would advise you not to vote on the day of the election, on the official November 3rd. Vote early. Please, do not put yourself in a position where and look, I know some people like to vote on November 3rd on election day because it's just a ritual. It's something they do. They love to do that. On the day of, it's something special to them. But I'm telling you, if you're going to do that, be prepared for a long 11, 12-hour wait in some cases. Be prepared for the shock of realizing as you get to the polling place that it is closed and that you've now got to go somewhere else 2 or 3 miles away, or God forbid, there is no polling place for you to vote at and you don't know and you've not been told where to go next. Do not put yourself in that position. Please. This election is too important. Welcome back. Since some of you, well, I don't know. Some of you might be skeptical about what I'm saying here. You might think that my hair is on fire or something. But let me read to you and I'll put links to these stories. I'm going to read the whole story, but I'm going to put links in the liner notes and also on Twitter as well, at the Popcorn REEL. If you think that I am making all this up, here's a headline from The American Prospect by Brittany Gibson, February the 28th, 2020. Why is that date significant? Because the very next day, Saturday, February the 29th, a leap year, 2020, was the South Carolina primary. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders were the principal candidates. There were others, but it was Joe Biden's coming out party that day as he scored a rollicking victory. And the narrative was that Jim Clyburn, the majority whip, one of the most powerful people in the country now, he's like the third or fourth most powerful person in the country or something right now. Jim Clyburn, who Bill Clinton maligned years ago when Clyburn supported Obama. Clyburn, in one of his books, I think it's his memoir, wrote about the death threats he got from Clinton supporters, Hillary Clinton supporters, back in 2008 when Clyburn had the temerity to endorse Barack Obama. Because Obama was leading in the delegate count, and he was on his way to getting the nomination. And so Jim Clyburn, back in 2008, you can go find this online, supported him, and he got death threats from Bill Clinton, not Bill Clinton, but from some Hillary Clinton supporters, or supporters saying that they were Hillary Clinton people, or people saying that they were Hillary Clinton supporters. Back in 2008, when, of course, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama ran against each other in the Democratic primary. And he writes about this in his book, one of his books, his memoir. He has a whole chapter devoted to it. Bill Clinton called him angry, cursed him out, how dare you, and it's all there. I'm not making that up. But I mentioned that because I want to mention this, because now Jim Clyburn is being praised for bringing Biden back and build back better. Bring Biden back. And I'll get to I'll get to Joe Biden in a moment. Some really good news, I think, for those who may be panicking. Some of the Democrats listening to me who may be panicking about Joe Biden or about his campaign. I'll get to that in a moment or two. But the headline of the American Prospect, South Carolina closing poll stations without notice, by Brittany Gibson, February 28th, 2020. The biggest county in the state, Greenville, will close 52 precincts. That is basically the only notice that readers got, that people who voted got. Because I don't remember there being any other publication talking about this. And I don't know if people got it on the local news or not. But on Twitter, I remember this. Someone from the South Carolina votes, part of the official apparatus down there, sent out tweets on the day of the vote around 10 o'clock Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern. We're sending out tweets. by the way, we're sorry, but there's some places that are closed. Too bloomin' late. And people have already started to vote. And you get tweets coming through talking about, well, we're sorry, we've had to close some precincts. Well, thanks a lot for telling us, Buster. You might have wanted to tell us that information, say, like 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before we bloomin' voted. You might have wanted to tell us. But that did not happen. And as a result, lots of people either didn't vote or had to go somewhere else to vote. That is a Republican-controlled state, South Carolina, with a Republican legislature. And the Republican state legislature, even more so than the Republican Secretary of State, is responsible for this. And all of this becomes so nakedly political. And sadly, that's the problem. We really need to separate those things. We shouldn't have politics influence this, whether it's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, whether it's the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I mean, Milwaukee voters stood out there for hours on lines, mostly black and brown, some poor white people, all on these lines for hours, while in Madison, Wisconsin, a more white area of Wisconsin, people were walking in and out of empty voting booths. There's articles on this too. I read one of them out weeks and months ago on an edition of this podcast. But that headline, South Carolina closing poll stations without notice, Greenville. By the way, Greenville is home to a lot of African American, a lot of black people. Bernie Sanders had a campaign headquarters in South Carolina, in Greenville, in that county. And Joe Biden won by a mile. Could that be a reason why he won so big? Look, it's all water under the bridge now. And I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. I'm voting for Joe Biden. And maybe for some Bernie supporters, it is not water under the bridge. And as a progressive, look, I'm never going to forget those kinds of things. But I'm also going to make sure that I do everything I can to make sure that Joe Biden is putting his hand on a Bible on January 20th, 2021. And I'm going to continue to push him, as I've been doing on Twitter lately with tweets. Now he's not reading my tweets, but this is the kind of thing we've got to do, and then really get in touch with that White House if and when, and I think it's going to be when, he is sworn in on the 20th of January. And we have to keep doing that. Those of us who are progressives like myself and others, and even if you're not a progressive and you're voting for him, you have to keep pushing him to do the things that you want him to do. That's how a quote-unquote democracy actually does thrive. When we are active in it, when we don't fall asleep like we did during 8 years of the Obama administration, and fell asleep by not voting at all in 2016, many of us. Many people stayed home. Many people. That's not going to happen this time, I guarantee you. Nobody's staying home now. Nobody's sitting out this election. I don't care what you hear on social media or if you hear it. There's a lot of disinformation now on social media. So you'll hear people like Susan Sarandon and other people saying, well, she didn't actually say this, but someone else said, I'm not going to vote for either candidate. I'm going to, vote for a third party or whatever. Maybe that person will, maybe they won't. And by the way, don't bother demonizing the person. If that's what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. I disagree with it. I think it's really a absolutely nihilistic thing to do. But we don't need the personal attacks. We don't need to be calling someone names and all that. And we need to just focus on voting. And focus on voting for Democrats all up and down the ticket, not just in the White House. Don't forget the Senate and the House. because you do not have an effective presidency without having the Senate and the House be also in your party's name. Period. That's just a fact. And you have to keep pushing these folks. But I want to get back to this story. And this story in South Carolina, as I said, by Brittany Gibson, February 28th, 2020. South Carolina closing poll stations without notice. This is in the American Prospect. You can go and search this at prospect.org, but you can go and search it online. And what she writes here is that Greenville County closed down 52 precincts. Despite the fact that, I'm reading now, despite the fact that South Carolina has an open primary and any registered voter can participate, the biggest county in the state has closed 1/3 of its polling locations. 1/3 of them. Closed down 52 precincts. Most of those precincts will be consolidated and some will be shifted into temporary locations. But instead of 151 polling locations, Greenville County will have only 118. Across the state, 131 precinct polling places will be relocated. This is the day before the election this article comes out. Now, I don't know how long, look, I doubt that Brittany Gibson held on to this information. But the state did not tell people this. South Carolina, the Republican-controlled state, did not tell its voters this earlier this year. You can read that article. I really urge you to. Brittany Gibson, that's the author of this article. And also, let me bring your attention to another article that I think you should be aware of. This is from The Guardian, March 2, 2020, the day before Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday was March the 3rd of this year. March the 3rd. Here's The Guardian on March the 2nd. Richard Salame, 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 March the 2nd, 2020. That's a Monday, the day before Super Tuesday. Here's the headline. Texas closes hundreds of polling sites, making it harder for minorities to vote. Guardian analysis finds that places where Black and Latino population is growing by the largest numbers experienced the majority of closures and could benefit Republicans. Last year, Texas led the U.S. South in an unenviable statistic, closing down the most polling stations, making it more difficult for people to vote and arguably benefiting Republicans. A report by civil rights group, the Leadership Conference Education Fund, found that 750 polls had been closed statewide, that's in Texas, since 2012. I'm skipping through here. The closures could exacerbate Texas's already chronically low voter turnout rates to the advantage of incumbent Republicans. Ongoing research by the University of Houston political scientist Geronimo Cortina and Brandon Rottinghaus indicates that people are less likely to vote if they have to travel farther to do so, and the effect is disproportionately greater for some groups of voters, such as Latinxes. Quote, "The fact of the matter is that Texas is not a red state," said Antonio Arellano of JOLT, a progressive Latino political organization. Quote, "Texas is a non-voting state." You've got to read that article, and I will post a link to it on the liner notes and on Twitter. Those two articles. And there are many more like it. And what happened the very next day in many parts of Texas, including Houston? Long lines. Long lines. People on lines for hours. MSNBC did a story on this. A live interview with a woman, a black woman, talking about, oh, they gave us pizza, and I guess that's the reason why people aren't angry and upset and more upset than they are. They pacified people with pizza, and we should not be doing this kind of thing in America. I know we've been doing it for decades, but we shouldn't be doing that anymore. This should be over with. But this is why elections have consequences. And I know there's been lots of gerrymandering. I know the Republicans have done that. We have to keep voting and vote in Democrats that can put a stop to this madness and this suppression of voters. This is why I want you to vote early. Do not be that person who on November 3rd goes to the precinct, whether in the morning or in the afternoon, and finds out that she cannot vote because the precinct that she has been told to go to has been closed. And that the precinct that she's supposed to now go to, well, we don't know where it is. Well, you have to drive 3 miles away. Well, I don't know, there's long lines. And then people will turn around and not vote. Believe me, that's what voter suppression is as well. It takes on many forms. So I urge anybody listening to this to tell people they know to vote early so that you avoid this kind of crap. Please, I cannot stress enough that you must vote early. You won't have to wait on a line for 11 hours, for 6 hours, for 9 hours, for 12 hours, for 4 hours. You will not have to do that if you vote early. If you vote absentee and drop it off at a drop box or at your local county board of elections office or at City Hall, if they are accepting them there. Please, I cannot stress this enough. Do not be that voter in Milwaukee. Do not be that voter in Atlanta. Do not be that voter in Louisville. Do not be that voter in Greenville County in South Carolina. Do not be that voter in Houston, Texas, or anywhere in San Antonio or across Texas where there is a heavily Latinx population. Majority of the state is Latinx. Do not be that person on November the 3rd. Because you can vote early in all of those places, either through absentee ballot or voting early in person. I cannot stress enough that you must vote early. And the earlier you vote in early voting, the better. This election is going to be won based on the early vote. I'm telling you now. This election is going to be based on voter turnout, but it's going to be won on early voter turnout. I'm telling you. The absentee ballots plus people who vote early in person. Absentee, vote by mail, same thing. If you vote early by sending those ballots in right away or dropping them off at a drop box right now, demanding your ballot right now, filling it in carefully, because that's very important, signing it and having that signature match what's on file, and you vote in person early, I'm telling you, this is going to be the key factor that determines this election. So please vote early. For those of you who are voting with Joe Biden, and I hope it's all of you, some good news or some news that perhaps some of you will feel heartened by, because there is some panic in some Democratic circles. There is some panic. And when I say Democratic circles, I'm not really talking about the party bosses and the corporate bigwigs. They're not panicking, I can assure you. But I mean about some of the voters, some of the everyday individuals like you and I who wonder about this stuff. Although I personally am not panicking about Biden's campaign. I think he's done very well so far. My only issue with the campaign, two issues. One is he has not spent enough, at least as far as I know. Based on what I know, I have not seen the financials of his campaign. But he's not spent enough on the Latinx community. He has been and is being outspent, according to Ben Jealous, who quoted this, and he is the head of People for the American Way. Ben Jealous used to be the head of the NAACP. Ben Jealous also ran for governor of Maryland, I think last year or the year before. But Ben Jealous said this on CNN last month, and I included part of the audio of it, that Donald Trump is outspending Joe Biden in Latinx media areas 10-1. That is not good. And I have, and I think others have too, have sent numerous tweets to Joe Biden's campaign's Twitter account, Joe Biden, @Joe Biden, and has said to him and warned him that really he should be spending more money in the Latinx community. It's the second or third biggest voting bloc in the country. Really the second or the third. It might be the third. I mean, this is a huge gold mine. And given what I just read out to you in those articles about the voters in Texas, the Latinx voters who won't go to the polls because they're obviously going to be discouraged when all the polling places are being closed, or many of them. So it's imperative that Joe Biden spend some money with that community. It's so critical. And with the youth. Build bridges with the youth. And I think youth voters are going to come out this time and in large numbers. But Joe Biden has to push that. And his surrogates do. But Biden does as well. But this is something that I think will hearten some of you out here who are listening to this. This is from the LA Times. And it's from today. Biden wants Blue Wall back. That's the headline. This is from today, September 11th, 2020. Subtitle, he's determined not to let Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin fall to Trump again. This is by Janet Hook and Eli Stokels. And I'm going to read portions of it. I'll have a link to this in the liner notes and on Twitter @ThePopcornREEL. The worst strategic mistake Hillary Clinton made in her 2016 campaign for president, many analysts believe, was overconfidence about 3 states Democrats had won in every presidential election since 1992, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. No one is going to accuse Joe Biden of taking those states for granted. By this weekend, Biden will have made 5 trips to those battleground states in less than 2 weeks. And the article goes on to mention about his trips to Pennsylvania. He's in Pennsylvania again today to commemorate what happened 19 years ago today, the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. He's been to Wisconsin and will be back there again. He was in Michigan, of course, just 2 days ago in Warren, Michigan. Make it in Michigan, make it in America, Biden said in Macomb County near Detroit, home to many of the working class white voters he aims to bring back into the Democratic fold. So this is something that's really heartening. For those of you who are wondering, well, we haven't seen Joe Biden go here. We haven't seen Joe Biden go there. Why isn't he doing this? Why isn't he doing that? Hopefully, this article will help alleviate some of your questions or concerns or worries or fears. Kamala Harris, of course, was in Wisconsin as well. She was in Florida yesterday or the day before, meeting with African American community leaders and doing outreach there. I'm sure she'll be doing other events. I know she's going to be doing other events. They're going all over the place, folks, and their surrogates are too. Quote, you can't take any of these Midwestern states for granted, said Representative Debbie Dingell. And you know who Debbie Dingell is. She, of course, is the congresswoman in Michigan, Democratic congresswoman, who also, of course, is the widow of the late John Dingell, a legend in Michigan politics, an absolute legend. He'd served in Congress for, 50, 60 years or so. And was also serving with distinction in the U.S. Army, in the military. This guy is an American hero, and he passed away last year. And Donald Trump denigrated him as well, saying such things as, well, I don't know, maybe he's looking at us from below. What he said about John Dingell. Disgusting. Totally disgusting. Debbie Dingell, who is the widow and is the congresswoman out of Michigan, had apparently in 2016 pleaded, I'm reading this now from the article, who in 2016 pleaded for Hillary Clinton, to do more to communicate with white working class voters in her state. Clinton famously made no campaign stops in Wisconsin. I know it's 2016. I know it was 4 years ago. But how can you not make a single stop in Wisconsin for the general election? How can you not do that? Which critics blamed for a drop in Democratic turnout. She put plenty of resources into Pennsylvania, including a star-studded election eve rally in Philadelphia, but it was not enough to overcome the surge of rural blue-collar voters, white voters, turning out for Trump. The result was a shocking triumph for Trump in 3 states that few Democrats believed were in question. In an election in which more than 130 million people voted, Trump won those 3 states by fewer than 80,000 votes. That's combined, everybody. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Trump won all 3 of those by less than 80,000 votes combined. Job 1 for Biden has been to win them back. And this article goes on. He's got loads of staffers in Wisconsin, 347 in Pennsylvania, 242 in Georgia, 242 in Wisconsin, 347 staffers in Pennsylvania, 112 in Georgia. And it goes on and on and on and talks about this. And they mention polling. I can't stand polling, and you know why. I've talked about this many times. But you've got to ignore these polls and get out there and help people to vote. You've got to get out there and make sure you're registered. You've got to get out there and register people to vote. The Biden campaign is doing what it's doing, and these Latinx PACs, super PACs, are doing what they are doing. But we've got to do what we must do, and that is to vote early. It's easy for someone like me to sit here on the sideline and criticize the Joe Biden campaign and say, heck, you need to spend more money in these communities. You need to spend more money here, or there, or there, or there, or over there, or up here, or behind you, or down here. But what we all have to do, what I have to do, and what I will do, is vote early. That's what we must do. They'll take care of what they must do. The Biden strategists are, and I don't know who they are. Well, I suspect I know who they are. But one thing that you are getting from this LA Times article, which I will link to in the liner notes of this episode, is that these strategists do not want to make the same and are not going to make the same mistakes that Hillary Clinton's pitiful strategists did 4 years ago. And I don't know if they did it intentionally or not, because they've screwed her twice. Her strategists, and they're different ones both times, but both of their strategists in 2008 and 2016 were really bad. Very, very bad. I get a sense that these strategists that are working on Biden's campaign ain't no fools, shall I say. I think that they understand, and this article reveals that. They are going to these states. They've had all their advertising in these states. They've got more money than Donald Trump does. Donald Trump, and you've seen the article in the New York Times this week, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, has burned through $800 million of his 1 whatever billion. And there's less than 500 million left for him to spend these next 8 weeks, 7.5. Joe Biden has been putting ads in all of these critical key states. I hate to call them swing states. They're key states. Every state's important in my view. But the key states are these states I've mentioned: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Arizona's become one. Minnesota's become one. Florida is always one. It's always close. It usually goes to the Republican. Obama actually won Florida one of the 2 years, if not both years. He actually won Florida. And one of the things he did is reach out to Latino voters, Latinx. Si se puede. Yes, we can. He did. He talked about, look, the Biden campaign has to do what it has to do. And I think it will. And I am confident that their campaign is being run a whole lot better on the strategy side than Hillary Clinton's 2 campaigns were. They will not take these places for granted. And even though there have been people worried about, well, we've seen more Trump signs here than Biden signs. Well, we've seen all these Trump signs, not many Biden signs. Do not be deceived, okay? That does not in this case necessarily mean that people aren't supporting Joe Biden. Might mean that they're afraid in this violent climate that we're in, and this hyper-politicized climate. They might be afraid to put a Biden sign out on their lawn for fear that it will be defaced or stolen or destroyed. I mean, that could be a factor. Unlike Hillary Clinton, whose campaign actually was saying, well, don't put Hillary signs out there, take them off. And they've been removing their own signs because they were worried that Trump supporters would. I mean, if you're a Biden supporter, wear your sign with pride. I mean, put it in your window, put it on your lawn. Don't be afraid, please. I know fear is out here and it's visceral and it's palpable and it's real. And the last thing I would ever do is trivialize that reality or that fear that you may have. But I've seen Biden signs here in San Francisco. I know San Francisco's supposedly progressive. It's not as progressive as it used to be, by the way. There are very conservative pockets of San Francisco. And yes, largely San Francisco is a more forward-thinking city. But, you know, this city also has the largest wealth disparity in the country. And you've got conservative pockets of San Francisco, like you have a lot of places elsewhere in the state here in California, where you've got a lot of conservatives down in San Diego area, parts of Los Angeles, in the Central Valley. At the Central Coast, you've got people north of here who are very conservative, who've got Confederate battle flags waving. So California is not this, yes, it traditionally votes Democratic, no question, but you've got these really heavy pockets in some places of people who, downright racists and flag waving Confederates running around. That's still very much a part of this state, lest you forget. You've got lots of racist people in this state. You've got lots of racist people here in San Francisco. So, this is a reality here that I'm just mentioning. But Joe Biden's campaign is definitely doing things differently. They have learned from the mistakes that Hillary Clinton's campaign made. And Joe Biden's going to keep campaigning. He is going to Arizona soon. He's going to be going to Florida next week, according to this article that I've read you parts of from the LA Times. There are more ad airings. He has been putting more ads in all of these states, according to advertising analytics. He's been putting ads heavily in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. He's been doing some in Florida, but not as much. Biden's campaign had 4 times as many ad airings in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania than the Trump campaign has. That's from this LA Times article. So for those of you who are a little nervous, and you may be nervous anyway, I mean, we've got lots of reasons to be, right? But in terms of the Biden campaign particularly, for those of you who are a little anxious about it, worried about it, because the media, of course, does not cover that campaign as much as it does every blooming tweet that Trump puts out there. Be rest assured, if you are not following Joe Biden on Twitter, or if you're not looking at him on YouTube and subscribing, be rest assured from me and from the LA Times and other sources that the Joe Biden campaign is taking this blooming thing seriously. They are. They're going to all the kinds of states you should be going to. My only thing is, yes, I'd like to see him penetrate the Latinx market more, and he should do that and must do that. And I would like to see him engage with the youth a bit more. I know that the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth progressive movement, all about climate awareness and the fight against climate change and all those things. They're an excellent youth movement. Brilliant. They've endorsed him. They're very happy, at least in some areas, with some of the things he's been saying to them. And they're going to hold him to that. And there are other organizations who are out here, youth organizations, who are getting people to vote. So the youth vote is there, and I want to see Biden also tap into that. And also would like to see him hold on to and keep pushing for black men, because there's about a 10 to 15% black men, 13% of them voted for Trump last time. Darn it. And, with some black people staying home, some white people staying home, that makes a big difference, among many other things that happened. So the Biden campaign has to do those things. But right now, with the article from the LA Times and with some of the things you will read, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I've read parts of it. You have people who are backing him. Look, and I don't necessarily like this endorsement. Rick Snyder, the former Republican governor, who has absolutely tanked that state and killed, quite frankly, he's done what Trump has done. No one's talking about that parallel. Flint. People dying in Flint, people poisoned in Flint. And God help us all. Rick Snyder endorsed Joe Biden this week. Oh, jeez. And some Democrats are jumping up and down about it, apparently. Joe Biden, I don't think he is. I don't know that he is particularly. But I think Joe Biden has to go to Flint. If he's going to go back to Michigan again, what he has to do is go to Flint. He's got some explaining to do there. Because I know that voters there in Flint, mostly black and brown and poor white, will be raising some critical questions about Rick Snyder to Joe Biden. And quite frankly, if I were Joe Biden, I would not have accepted that endorsement, but that's just me. But what Joe Biden's trying to do, I think, is get this broad coalition, the way Obama did. Obama got some Republicans, quite a few of them, by the way, in 2008. Less so in 2012, but he got a cross-section of them in 2008 when Colin Powell endorsed him and others did, and they went along with that. And there were some who did, Republicans, and Biden's going to get a sizable number of Republicans. He may get 10% of Republicans. Maybe he's banking to get 15 to 20% of Republicans. If Joe Biden let's put it this way, if Joe Biden is able to get 20% of Republican voters to vote for him, he's going to have a landslide. I mean, if he can get 20% of Republican voters to vote for him, this election will be over. And it will be over in early voting too. I want to reiterate that. If he can get 20%, maybe that's what he's trying to do. And I've criticized Democrats for trying to do this, right? What you should be doing is holding on to your base. The way Trump is doing now, he's doing that. He's consolidating his base and hoping to slow down turnout from black men and slow down turnout in some other areas amongst the Latinx community, 40% of which apparently supports him right now. Joe Biden and company and the Democrats must keep hammering home to the Latinx community and to black men. because I'm sure that Trump will use that clip of Joe Biden talking to Charlemagne the God earlier this year, and I'm sure that will be something they've already been doing. They've been doing it. They did it at the convention. So I really would like Joe Biden to do more of that. So there you go. That's pretty much it. What a day this has been, a solemn day. A day to also take note of a pandemic that you can't ignore. A day to remember and never forget 9/11/2001. A day to look forward to voting and voting early, and keeping in mind the story that I read you in Wisconsin, the stories that I read you from South Carolina and from Texas, and the story that I read you about Joe Biden's campaign and the affirmative things that it is doing but needs to do more of. Please vote early and vote right now. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.